Hi, today, today's class is about Python classes and objects. Okay, I'm gonna first explain what a Python class is, then I'm gonna explain what an object is, then we're gonna see how we can create a class in Python, and then we are gonna also see how we can initialize an object and add attributes, and also call the methods inside that object. Okay, I'll just give you an overview first. So, what do you know about classes? I'll tell you first point. A class is just a blueprint for an object. Okay. So let's consider a car. In this example, a car, every car has some common features like steering, there are some wheels, and there is a headlight bumper, etc. Right? So, which means that every car has certain features common, and those features are the blueprint of that car. Now, in an object there is attributes and then there is functions or called it is called methods. So in this cars example, let's see what are the attributes. So the if I'll read these examples for you. So first about attributes means for a car there are wheels, there are bumper, there is an engine, there is a there are two side mirrors and a maximum speed, etc. So these are the fact variables that can be stored inside a class for the example of this car. Okay, then there are certain functions for a car like you can drive a car forwards, you can put it in reverse gear, you can change the gears if there is an not an automatic gear system, and if there is an automatic gear system then also you can change certain gears, right? So those are the functions of a car. Then you can turn on the light, turn off the light, etc. So these features would be common for almost all cars. So we can say the class car contains these attributes and functions. Now let's consider about an object. An object is simply a collection of data and methods. Okay, so we have already learned about classes. In class there will be a blueprint, or there will be a structure for creating these variables and functions. But in objects there are specific values for variables and functions. I'll explain with an example. Let's see. So let's see the same example of the car, and we have seen the blueprint of the car. Now let's see some of the objects of that car. So in the left we can see a red car. So this car is a red car, this is blue, and this is green. Okay, there is the first difference in that car. First, let's assume the first initial property of a car in the class is color. Okay, so in the first object the color of the car is red, and the next attribute of the second car's first attribute is blue because the color of the car is blue, and the next is green. So you understand the difference, right? In a class we'll only define the attribute as color, and in an object we can say the specific value for that color. So we have seen that max speed. So I'll give you an example. Like if you take a car like a Maruti 800. Okay, in Maruti 800 the maximum speed would be like 120, 180, something like that for at max. But if you think of a Maserati, okay, you can see the speed will be like 320, like 320 kilometers per hour or like that, or a Bugatti. So that is the difference between classes and objects. So now let's understand how we can create classes in Python. Okay, great. Let's go on to the next session. So here we get into some more fun stuff. We'll go on to learn how we can do this stuff in Python. So we have said about class. Okay, so you must know how we can create a class using the keyword, because we have already learned so many things in Python. We have an intuition, right? So when we define a function we use def. Just like that, when we define a class we use the keyword class. Okay, first we have to give class, then we give the class name, and then we give a brackets or parenthesis, then we give the quotation colon marks. Okay, so you can also see the parallels between defining a class and a function, right? You remember, instead of this class keyword we just use the def keyword, right? Let's move on to the next. So when we create a function, a class, we have to understand that it has certain initial properties. So when we create an object of the Maruti car, and we use the class as car. So using the class car, we create an object Maruti. So we have to give some initial properties for that. Like we have to initialize the attributes like maximum speed, the color of that specific car. Like Maruti means a specific model of Maruti, right? So for that, we use the init method. The init method in Python is a constructor. It's similar to constructor in other programming languages. So whenever we initialize an object, this constructor runs or this init function runs. Whatever we want to initialize the function with, we can give inside this init method. So the next point is init method is called a constructor. We already know. Init is used to initialize the object attribute. Okay, now let's see an example for that. Okay, you can see the screen. First, we have created a class named car. Then we have given the first initial constructor and it is called init. Now, you need to remember that we have to use the diff keyword because init is also a function. So as we can know, we remember that to create a function we need diff keyword, and then the init method we create. So this is a pre-built method. You cannot give any other name for that. So this init method is defined as, first you give two underscores, then you type init, and then you give another two underscores. Okay, great. Inside that init method, you have to remember you have to always use a variable named self. I'll explain why self is used in the later sessions, but now you just remember it like that. Self means a variable or a instance inside the class. It means it is referring to something inside the class, which means to the my own self, right? So if I go into my house and look at my coat or my phone, I'll say it's myself or self. It's just like that. Okay, you don't need to confuse yourself with that. Self is used inside class to show the value belonging to the class. Okay, great. Now let's move on to the next step, which is creating an object. Okay, so we have learned about how we can initialize a class, right? Now we have learned about also init method. Init method means it runs every time initially when an object is created. So here you can see the arrow mark shows that Maruti equal to car of car, then a brackets. Inside that we give the initial value. So that is how we create a object. Okay, using the class name first. First we give a name for the variable for the object. Then we use the assignment operator. You remember assignment operator, right? It's equal to. So we use the equal to assignment operator. We give the class name and we give a parenthesis. Inside that we give the initial values. Okay, here the initial value is 120. Why we give 120? Can you just think of it? So when we create an object with the initial value 120, the class is created and inside that the init method runs first. We already said that, right? So when the init method runs, the self you don't mind about that because self is automatically passed by the class. It is how Python works. You can give any name. You don't need to give self itself, but it is a convention in Python to give self because we know the programming, the main objective of programming is to write like legible code, right? So it is readable and another programmer will understand our code in the future. We need to think about that and we have to code. So then we give the first argument. So in this init method, the first argument is not self. Self is passed by the class itself. The second is called max speed. That's what comes here. The 120 will go to max speed. And then what happens? Self dot max speed equal to max speed, which means when we pass this variable, this value 120, it is assigned to this local variable max speed. You know about local variables and global variables, right? We have learned before. So we give this argument or this local variable max speed gets initialized with 120, and that 120 is stored into the max speed variable of the class. Now when we do self dot max speed, it means that the variable or the attribute belongs to the class. Now you can access the max speed in any position of this class. So that's the importance of self keyword. If you don't give self, then we can only use that inside the init method, because that the scope of that variable gets limited to the init method. When we use self, the scope of that variable, we have learned about scopes, right? So the scope of that variable gets into the whole class. We can use that in the whole class. Okay, is that clear?